coming up on the Hey Friend podcast. You do feel good and fulfilled kind of hanging out with that person, so you don't need anyone else, and you're kind of taking it from a standpoint of like, oh, I'll go call that person once I need them. Like once things start going bad here, then I'll go call them. But it's like, you don't want to wait until things go south before you jump back into that, because they might not be there then. Like you might have, I mean, hopefully, but there's a chance that you burn bridges there too if you're not nurturing them. And I mean, nobody wants to be called only when they're needed, you know?
Mm-hmm. It puts a lot of pressure on your significant other, whether they're your spouse or whether they're whether you've been dating for a long time or whatever. If you don't have other people outside of that, the onus is on that other person to solve your problems, or like you were talking about, Belle, to be the one who listens to all your problems. Which, right, if you love someone, you want to care about them and be attentive to what's going on. But oftentimes, one person cannot carry the weight of another person's life. That's meant to be spread out amongst a community, and ultimately, right, entrusted to God as the one who's going to carry the weight of that. So I'd say that's one big thing I'd see.
I realized quickly, and it kind of humbled me in a way, like that person's not perfect, and you're going to have struggles with them too. And that's where it's important to have other friends. So a positive of having friends in this stage of life is definitely having those people to lean on and go to help during struggles or things like that.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Hey Friend podcast. We're so happy to have you here today. And today we get to talk to one of my good friends, Belle. Belle, why don't you tell people a little bit about you?
Yeah, hello. My name is Belle. I am 22, and I just got engaged to my fiance, Austin.
Let's go.
So we're getting married in like a month and a half. So we're in like the heat of wedding planning and starting our life together in Minnesota. And about a year ago, I was doing college full-time and started posting on social media about homemaking and traditional womanhood, two things I'm very passionate about. And things kind of took off. And so I graduated from college about 5 months after that and decided I could do that full time. So that's what I currently do.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was just over a year ago that you started doing
that. Yeah,
crazy.
It was May 2023. So
Belle
coming
is
up on a
killing
year.
it too. You're killing it. It's awesome what you're doing. It's awesome how God's using you to do
thank you.
what you're doing on social media. So yeah, Ben, where are we going today with Belle?
Yeah, so we, because Belle recently got engaged and is getting married, we wanted to talk about like how do you navigate friendship as you enter a new stage of life. So I'm married. I have 3 kids with a 4th on the way. Lucas is a single dude. Belle's engaged. So ladies, Lucas is single. So we wanted to talk about the challenges and like how do you navigate those changes well? Because the reality is like I did college and young adult ministry for a bunch of years. My wife and I were probably like 4-ish years ahead of most of our closest friends in the way of like moving from one life stage to the next. We got married 3 or 4 years before most of the people in our friend group did. We had kids a couple years before most of the people in our friend group did. And that was difficult in some ways. Like it changes the dynamic of the relationships. We had people that we were close friends with that, at least from our perspective, it was like, oh, all of a sudden they're not asking us to hang out anymore. Or we had to say no to doing stuff that we had wanted to do. All that stuff can be challenging. So we wanted to have a conversation about that. Maybe let's start out with this question. I'm curious for you, Belle, as you've entered engagement, looking towards marriage, what are some of the things that you have found to be either like a positive or a negative in relation to your friends who are still single or maybe are in a different stage of life than where you're at right now?
Yeah. I would say as I've gotten engaged and looking towards marriage, one of the hardest things with that is prioritizing time with them still, because life is busy. I think whether you're engaged or not, we can all relate to that. Like things are busy in college, graduating college, like you have work and all these things going on. So it's hard to find time. But I think on top of that, it's like you also have this person who's like your best friend who you really enjoy spending time with. And it's fulfilling to spend time with them too. So it's like you don't necessarily feel the need constantly to have other people when you feel so fulfilled by one person. But I realized quickly, and it kind of humbled me in a way, like that person's not perfect, and you're going to have struggles with them too. And that's where it's important to have other friends. So a positive of having friends in this stage of life is definitely having those people to lean on and go to help during struggles or things like that.
Remember your fiance's name?
Austin.
Did you and Austin did you guys have like a similar group of friends, or were you coming from two different like backgrounds, groups of friends?
We pretty much came from two different backgrounds. We had a little bit of overlap, but primarily different groups.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the ways now that, you know, even facing those challenges of like, man, I have to put this on my calendar, man, it's easier just to hang out with Austin and cook dinner with him, and I enjoy hanging out with Austin. And so two questions there. What are the differences that you've noticed? It's like, you know, let's just say you have a friend that's a female that's pouring into your life. You can't get the same perspective that Austin can give. So it's like, did you miss that? Is that what you're looking for? Or what was it like, when did you say, okay, I need more than Austin? What is that? Yeah. What was that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I definitely went through that phase of like realization after Austin and I got really close. Like we dated for a couple years and our engagement's been about 6 months, but I'd say like it kind of happened more in the dating process where I realized like, okay, I really enjoy hanging out with Austin, yes, but I'm kind of needing a little bit more. And one way I like to visualize it, this is kind of silly, but you guys remember those like My Plate meals where it paints a picture of like your
on the
whole
wall
plate
in school and
yes,
stuff.
they had them in like your elementary school. So like I imagine that like your partner is kind of your main meal, so like your protein or your carb, and then your other friends are like your side dishes. So like, yes, technically you could just eat the main course and like survive, but if you eat your whole plate, you're gonna feel a lot more nourished.
I've never looked at it that way.
I like it.
I don't know why I thought of this, but like if you eat your whole plate, you're gonna feel a lot more nourished and balanced, and you're gonna stay full longer and like all those things. So that's kind of how I view having your additional friendships, is like if you go hang out with them, then you're gonna feel a lot more balanced as a whole. So like I first noticed like, okay, I need somebody to vent to other than Austin for every single thing and every inconvenience I have, because that's not necessarily always healthy for our relationship. And like you said, he doesn't understand things that ways my girlfriends can. And so it's important to go meet with them. And I don't know the science behind it, but I know that when I go get coffee with one of my girlfriends and we can chat and relate to each other and laugh together and all that, like I leave those conversations feeling like really good and fulfilled, and then I can go back into my relationship with Austin, but also all of life just like feeling better. So again, I don't know the science behind that, but I know it's good.
And I mean, my wife and I, not necessarily intentionally, but just because we had so many friends who were single when we got married, it ended up working out that it was probably at least one night every other week, one of us would be out, and probably more like early on in marriage. Initially, it was probably like we each had a night a week where we were out doing stuff with, I was out hanging out with some guys, she was out hanging out with some girls, and doing that separately. A little bit harder to do now that we have kids, and one of us is going to have to stay home and watch the kids or something like that. But that we definitely experienced the same thing, where it was, you would come back almost more energized for your relationship with your fiance or with your spouse after getting to hang out with.
Distance makes the love grow fonder.
Yeah, right.
And I think people also say like, you can look at it from a perspective like you need one or the other. You know, why not have both? And they both provide areas in our life that spiritually, especially, you know, we were all created to be in community with believers too. And we live in a world with people that don't believe too. It's like, how do we care for each other? How do we love them well too? So it's, you know, I think it's silly when someone says, I think, again, this question I've always asked of like, oh, why do my parents not have friends? Or why do my friends' parents not have friends? Like, do we want to get to that? in our lives. Like, why do we have to do that? Why does it have to look the same? So, but it's interesting because it's beautiful. Friendships, someone that can pour into your marriage too. It's like, man, they're part of that marriage. It takes community for marriage. I'm not married yet, but one of my friends just had a baby, and it's beautiful how all of us showed up to the hospital, and like, man, like this girl is gonna have all these cool uncles. The coolest one's gonna be Lucas. We all know that.
Of course.
But it's like, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, I wish to see that more from
Yeah.
our parents too. So.
And I think one way to think about it too is like, yes, like God gave you that person that you're going to marry and like spend your life with, but God also gave you the gift of all these other people in your life. And like, it is kind of our responsibility to nurture those friendships too,
Something that we're talking about, the kind of healthy side of things, right? The ideal is you have a balance of, you got your plate and you got all different types of friends on there, and who gets to be the veggies and who gets to be the fruit. I don't know. That'll depend on the friendship. But I know I have seen plenty of instances of people that I know personally and just kind of observing from a distance where they get in a romantic relationship with someone and they just kind of disappear from all their other friendships. So what do you guys think? Why does that happen? And is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? Neutral?
Yeah, I think like I totally did that when I first started dating Austin. Like I was like, yep, we're hanging out. Like it's you and me. Like I just wanted to spend a ton of time with him because I liked him and he was fun to spend time with. And that's where I kind of talked about before. I took that harder realization of like, oh shoot, I'm totally neglecting these other friendships.
Yeah.
But I think it happens. Oh gosh, I don't know. I think it happens because, and I said this before, but you do feel good and fulfilled kind of hanging out with that person. So you don't need anyone else. And you're kind of taking it from a standpoint of like, oh, I'll go call that person once I need them. Like once things start going bad here, then I'll go call them. But it's like, you don't want to wait until things go south before you jump back into that because they might not be there then. Like you might have, I mean, hopefully, but there's a chance that you've burned bridges there too if you're not nurturing them. And I mean, nobody wants to be called only when they're needed,
Mm-hmm.
Was there a point for you where was that like a light bulb moment? Aha, I all of a sudden realized this, or was there stuff that happened for you that was kind of like the trigger of that realization? Like, oh, I need to be intentional in investing in these other relationships.
I guess I can't think of like one moment specifically or like any like really bad tangible outcomes. It was more of just like a general over time realization like, oh, I'm starting to feel distant from these friends I used to hang out with a lot, and kind of I guess started to just miss them in general. Like, oh, looking back or even seeing like a Snapchat memory or something and being like, oh, we used to go do this all the time together. Like I should call them, I should text them, stuff like that. So
yeah. Lucas, how about from your perspective, man? I'm sure you've seen friends of yours move into engagement marriage who have kind of disengaged from other friendships. Maybe not, but if you have, what do you see? What do you think is motivating that?
I like to say a lot. I don't know why every time I start a sentence, but at that stage, friends that have gotten married or moved into marriage or friends that have started dating, I wasn't really close with them as that much. Like it didn't affect me, But I think from a guy perspective, we just don't care.
Guys are like whatever.
Yeah, it happens, But but now, having the 6 guys in my life, it's like we have enough touch points. I think Monday nights for us is like getting together. Like if we see things like that, we would call that out. I hope, but we haven't. Again, it's really just it's work of like, hey, let's get together outside of the group. Hey, hey, one of the friends is getting married here. Their wedding is this summer too, and they're planning their wedding. And I think they've done a great job of just like staying in touch with their friends, or they've done a great. And if they weren't doing a great job, I think one of the guys would say something. So
Mhm,
I haven't had that. Yes, at that time we were close friends, but even understanding real friendships now, like it wasn't
yeah.
like that. So
Yeah, and it sounds like you guys with that core group of people, you already have built in those connection points, whether or not someone's engaged or married. They know I'm a part of this group. I gather with these people regularly.
and if any of us start dating again, like the person that we're dating is gonna know the group too. You know, they're gonna know like, hey, there's these guys that are in my life. So like that's what's one cool thing that we have.
Yeah. I think one of the common things I see in when that happens, you get in a romantic relationship and start withdrawing from those friendships is probably, I mean, it's natural, right? Like you're describing, Belle, you want to spend a lot of time with this person that you love and they're your favorite person. So you want the majority of your time and energy to go into that relationship. But another like motivator I feel like is it's often more work to include each other's friends in that relationship, especially if you're coming from different groups of friends. There's like the kind of weirdness or awkwardness of integrating these two groups together. And if you're not really intentional about that, it can just be easier to be like, well, we won't do that. And I think it's actually really healthy in marriage. There's plenty of married couples who they have their groups of friends, and those two groups of friends, like the guy's friends and the girl's friends, they don't really interact. I think it's actually going to be a healthy thing for a marriage to have the couple to both be like, okay, we know these other people, these are our friends, and not just my friends or your friends.
What do you guys think happens to when you don't have that? How do you, from outside perspective, you know someone, they've been married for a long time, and they don't have community in their life, or they don't have friends in their life, like, you know, they don't have any outside relationship. What does that look like? What are some of the things that happen that's not good?
It puts a lot of pressure on your significant other, whether they're your spouse or whether they're whether you've been dating for a long time or whatever. If you don't have other people outside of that, the onus is on that other person to solve your problems, or like you were talking about, Belle, to be the one who listens to all your problems. Which, right, if you love someone, you want to care about them and be attentive to what's going on. But oftentimes, one person cannot carry the weight of another person's life. That's meant to be spread out amongst a community and ultimately, right, entrusted to God as the one who's going to carry the weight of that. So I'd say that's one big thing I'd see. Yeah. And as a result of that, if that pressure is there, typically one person in the relationship starts to disengage and not invest their heart in it because like, well, this is too much for me, so I'm just going to pull back. And then usually the other person starts pushing in harder because they're like, oh, this person that I've invested so much in is now drawing back emotionally. And then it just compounds the problem over time.
So true.
Yeah, I think one thing that can start to happen too, and I think you hear this more in dating typically, it being an issue, but you can start to kind of place your worth and identity in that person. And you mentioned it too, kind of almost idolize them even above God and start to let them define, you know, who you are and things like that. And whether you're dating or in a marriage, I don't think that's healthy either because they're a sinful person. They're going to mess up. And if you're basing your worth or identity or whatever it is off of them, and then they make a mistake and hurt you, well, then that's saying that you're not worthy anymore, which just isn't true. And so I think that can happen as well, as you kind of start to place them above God, and that's definitely not something we want.
Has this happened to you guys of just like, you know, you have friends in your life, but your significant other doesn't. And that puts, you want them to have friends too, you know, but they don't want to do it. They're like, no, I have you, it's enough. Have you guys ever dealt with anything like that?
I would say I've actually dealt with it on the end of like me being the one that doesn't have as many friends, which I definitely do have friends, but we also, so like Austin lives about 40 minutes away from where I currently live. And so all my friends are here. Yeah. He's out there, but I spend most weekends there. And so we kind of run into the issue sometimes of he'll be like, oh, it's the weekend. I'm going to hang out with my friend tonight. And then he'll kind of feel bad, like if I don't have someone to hang out
You're
with.
left by yourself.
Yeah, and I'm like, no, it's fine. Go, like I'll watch a movie or like whatever it is, or hang out with a sister or something. But I've seen it from his point of view where like I can tell he doesn't want to go because he feels like he's kind of leaving me behind. But I know it's healthy for him to go.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of been on the other end of it, I guess.
Yeah, it's probably the inverse of that for my wife and I. I'm much more extroverted. She's much more introverted. Not that she doesn't have friends, but for her, it takes more energy, especially as a mom too. She spending all day with kids, so it's like, okay, by the time the day is done, she doesn't necessarily feel like she has a ton of energy to go out and hang out with a bunch of other people. So from my perspective, I feel like oftentimes it's the like, no, okay, I'm going to encourage you. This is valuable for you to have time with other gals. So I'm going to encourage you. Like, I'll take the kids. Like, our groove right now is she has a group of gals that she gets together with Tuesday mornings because my work is flexible. So I watch the kids for like 4 hours on Tuesday mornings so that she can go meet with these ladies. And that's been really valuable to be intentional about that. And I think that's the key thing is like, there's a balance there, despite the fact that we were laughing about your plate metaphor. It is, I think it's a helpful way to think about it, is that, man, if you can survive on just chicken for probably not indefinitely, but definitely for a long time, but there's going to be a cost to that over time. Yeah. So I think that's been how that's operated for us. I'm trying to think in like the couple dating relationships I had before getting married. I don't know if there was ever any instances in that. Almost every relationship I've been in, I've been the more extroverted one. So I have more friends.
It's weird. Yeah, I'm pretty extrovert. You know, I like meeting new people, and I like starting conversations with anyone. I can do that, right?
Yeah.
But when I was dating before, it's like I turned to like, no, I don't want to hang out with any of my friends. I don't know what happened, but again, I was at that time still living worldly, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like it's weird how being in a relationship can do that sometimes. So it's like, is it harder, do you think? You have to like try harder to like make time for your friends? Because you already have that person right there and they're also your friend too, you know? So is it harder?
Yeah, I would say what I've found is really helpful is I have to just meet with friends on a consistent basis and do the same thing, like whether it's every week or every month or whatever it is. So like right now I get together with one of my girlfriends and get coffee every Friday. We just work from a coffee shop together. We both work remotely. So we just sit there for the day, eat lunch together. And then every Tuesday I do trivia night with a couple friends. You've come one night.
Yeah. I did a horrible job. I did not help.
It's hard.
Yeah.
We lose every week.
Yeah.
It's really hard. But it's still fun. I mean, that's obviously not the point. It's just an excuse to get together. But I found that once I had those in place, it was like, okay, it's in my schedule. I know I'm going to do it versus like, let's get together. And then that just never happens. And I think you can do it on a broader scale too. Like all the girls I know from high school, we do like a Friendsgiving every year or Secret Santa every year. So we know we'll get together at least a couple times every year. So I think just putting it on the schedule and making it a tradition or a consistent thing is really helpful.
Yeah, it definitely takes more work. I mean, even purely from the fact that like, okay, now it's not just me coordinating my schedule. I also have this other person. If you're married or if you have kids, for us, we have a total of 4, and soon it'll be 5 people we have to like figure out how does these puzzle pieces fit together. So it definitely takes more work, and therefore, I think what you're saying,
to be intentional,
scheduling it, structuring it is valuable because that makes it like, okay, this is going to happen. I'd say I think oftentimes the reality is it's just when you are in a romantic relationship with someone, that person feels safer and more comfortable, and depending on what your backstory is and how you're wired, it's easy for that to kind of suck you in and take all your focus and energy. And that's okay for a short amount of time. That's how we're wired to function as human beings in romantic relationships. You're drawn to that person biblically, right? You get married. The idea is that you become one flesh. So there's that like spiritual and emotional gravity that's pulling you together. But that's an unhealthy thing if it happens, I think, too completely to the point where it disengages you from other relationships. Because, right, you look at God the Father, God the Son, God the Trinity, they are one, but they still retain their own unique identity. And that does not disconnect them from relationship with their creation. They're saying we're going to flow out. The love that we have between each other is healthy when it overflows into drawing other people into the love. But if you can tell it's an unhealthy love if it's drawing you away from other people around you. Yeah.
How about like, you're married, you're engaged. In times of hard times in your engagement or in your marriage, inviting a friend in to talk about that. Sometimes it's whether we're dating someone, we're engaged or married, it's like I'm going to just go hang out with that person and we'll just have fun. I think that's good. But like going deep is just as important too.
Yeah.
So like, what is that like? For someone that's like struggling right now, someone that's engaged or married and they have friends, but they don't go deep with them. What was it like for you guys in moments that you have gone deep, but also what was the response behind that from your significant other? So,
yeah, you're saying like inviting them into like a conversation with you as a couple, or are you saying like individually having friends that you go deep with?
Both. I would say both. And like inviting, basically like, hey, we want you to be part of our marriage in a way of like, man, like speak into the things that we're doing. Like speak in as soon as kids come in my life. Like we want you to speak into this marriage, So like, yeah, from that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. We've, one of the unique things that my wife and I have done, we didn't necessarily set out to do this, but it's happened, is we've been married for, it's going to be 12 years. Yeah. It'll be 12 years this July. And 9 of those years now, maybe it's 10 of those years, we've had people living with us, at least one person living with us for most of that time. And we were never like, hey, we want to have people live with us our whole marriage. We've had a friend who had a need, we had an extra room, so they lived with us, or various things like that. Right now, my youngest brother lives with us because he's up here doing college. It's like, hey, you can use one of our extra rooms. So that's been a big way for us to invite people in, and just therefore they're a part of our lives, they're observing things that are going on. And there's been times over the years where we've had, conversations with people where they've spoken into our marriage, or we've gotten to speak into their lives. A lot of the people who have lived with us have been young single guys. So there's been some instance of like, hey, Kelly being like, you say you want to get married, man, you better not leave your underwear on the floor in the bathroom, or like wipe up your hair after you shave, or, stuff like that, where she's been able to kind of, hey, this is what it's like to live with a woman. And there's been some vice versa of that. So that's been one big way. I think for us, I actually would love to have more, like conversation, kind of like what you're describing with our friends who are single, or even other couples. Like, hey, here's what we see in your marriage. That hasn't happened a whole lot. It's probably been more for us of like, I've got my guy friends, some of whom are single, some of whom are married. She's got her friends who are gals, some of whom are single, some of whom are married, where we're going and having conversations about whatever, including marriage and how do you navigate ups and downs in marriage with those people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I've had a similar experience where I've like talked about it more one-on-one with my girlfriends, but we haven't really had the chance to have invite a friend into our relationship to speak into it, other than our pastor, as we've been doing we've been doing marriage premarital counseling for the last few weeks. So that's kind of our first taste of that. But I would say my experience with going to my girlfriends has been like, a lot of the time, I think a lot of us do this. Like, you think you're the only one that has an issue. And then honestly, a lot of the time it's been like a friend who's willing to be vulnerable and say something about her relationship. And then me be like, oh, wow, like I struggle with that too. I just was too scared to say it because I thought that was bad, or like, I don't know. But that's kind of my experience too, is like we have more of the same struggles than we realize.
Yeah,
And like,
yeah.
it's really helpful to talk through it with somebody who also might have the same struggle. So
Yeah. Sometimes we let sin and shame isolate
Right.
our marriage, isolate us.
right,
you
like
know?
I have a fear of being like, oh, my relationship has to be perfect to everybody, otherwise it's bad. And it's like, no, nobody's relationship is perfect. And if you can be vulnerable with people, close friends, I think it's really healthy and useful. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like we live in a world where there's this attitude of if you haven't experienced it, you can't speak into it. You know, like you haven't experienced my suffering or my abuse, therefore you can't. How dare you try to give me advice on it? That's the I see plenty of responses like that to stuff online, and have experienced it personally. And I think that's patently not true, right? You don't have to be an Olympic level athlete in order to coach Olympic level athletes.
Right.
There's stuff you need to know. You need to know about the sport and you need to know about coaching, but you can put most of the coaches of the world's greatest athletes and they're going to not be nearly as good of an athlete as the people that they're coaching. And I think that same concept applies. Like, so there's this kind of mindset out there of like, okay, if you're not married, you can't give me advice as a married person about marriage. Or if you're, if you don't have kids, you can't have good ideas about parenting. Obviously there's things that like you're going to learn as you experience it that you wouldn't know just from reading about it or learning about it. But I think we need to remove some of that stigma and be willing to, like you're saying, get advice or share with people who are maybe not in the stage of life that we're in and listen to what they have to offer. And you're probably going to learn a lot. And then they're going to learn a lot too about, like, if I'm talking with one of my single buddies about marriage and listening to his thoughts on how do you navigate relationship, he's going to learn from the questions I'm asking, helpful things about that he might need to know as he moves towards marriage.
And sometimes we just want to, and when we do want to speak into it, we do it from I think there's a tension between inviting someone in and letting someone that's close to you just like tell you what they're seeing, or there's times that the Lord can use anyone to speak to you, so it's like, but there's this side of like being a hypocrite too, in a way of just like, Jesus tells us to take the pluck out of our own eye before we take the speck. I'm not saying that backwards probably, but out of our brother's or sister's eyes, right? So it's like, man, like, I think there is this, I don't know what I'm trying to get to here, but I think there's this balance there for sure. But I think if we are not being vulnerable, if we're not being real with our friends that are close to us, there's only few that you can go deep with, right? If we're not doing that, I think that can cause us to pretend.
So I'm curious, and maybe let's answer these questions. I want to have each one of us give some advice or comments. So like, Luke, why don't we start with you, Lucas? If you were speaking to some of your friends who are engaged or married with kids, like what would you want them to know, or what advice would you give them about doing friendship well with you as a single guy?
It might feel like more work of like, gosh, I got to text Lucas. Gosh, I got to hang out with Lucas. Or I'm busy with the kids, or I'm busy at home. It might feel like it's an extra thing that you will do. But when you do those, when you invite someone in that's outside of your marriage, I feel like that can be also a blessing, and in a way of just like, hey, you being heard or you being seen, because there's a lot of things happening at the house, or there's a lot of things going on in your marriage. But like it's like being like, we're not married, we're just friends, and we choose to be there for each other, So like, if you are busy with your family and we're busy with your spouse, or like, man, like if your friend's choosing you, choose them back. That's what I would say. And the little things.
I'm curious, would you, like, does it feel, and you said you don't really have a ton of friends in this stage of life, but let's say you had friends who married with kids or other stuff like that, and they're like, sorry, man, I can't hang out with you one-on-one, but you're welcome to come over for dinner. does that feel less valid to you relationally? Be like, oh, hey, hang out with their family versus let's go do something one-on-one, or is that like, dude, those are I feel the same about that.
Honestly, we're called to serve each other well, you know. So if that's a season of their life, of like, yeah, there's times that I do want to hang out with the outside of your house, you know. But how do I serve my brother well or my sister well? Just like, man, yeah, they do have a lot going on, and maybe the Lord's asking me to just spend time with them. You know, it's a lot more easier for me because I'm a single one here. I don't have a lot of things, but for them, I have to also put myself in their shoes too. It's like, man, how about we just both go first and we just both serve each other well, and then I think if we put certain situations or certain, it's like, this is how the only way to do it. Someone can take this like, okay, only go over to their house if they're having kids. Like, but why? Why do we have to do that? You know, what if they're available and they can come have coffee with me? You know, so it's like, but just serve each other well. Come from a perspective like, how do I love this person well, and how do I extend what he extends to me well to them? So
Same question to you, Belle, as a gal who's engaged / entering marriage. What advice would you give?
I would say, like, this is definitely one of the most exciting times of my life. Like, yeah, I just am every day. I'm like so happy and excited. I get to marry the person I love. So when I get to share that excitement with my friends and they ask me about it and stuff like that, I feel very like seen and valued. Like, it's fun on my own being excited, but it's 10 times more fun to be excited with someone else who's like, hey, like, this is so great. Like, so I would say, like, for single friends or married friends, like, if you have somebody who is getting engaged in your life, like, just support them and be happy with them. Like, I don't know the exact passage in the Bible, but it says, like, rejoice with them when they rejoice, and, you know, mourn when they mourn. So, like, yeah, definitely just like being excited with me or that person. And I would say there was one other thing I was going to say. What was it? Oh, I liked how you asked Lucas if it would be the same if you invited him over for dinner versus going out somewhere, because as like, I'm becoming more of a homebody all the time. And I already know once like Austin and I do move into our house together, like, it's going to be just more and more a place where we are. And like, we want to be able to invite our friends there. And, you know, we are big, like, family people. We're always with each other's families. And maybe that's because we both still live at home. But I think there is like joy in numbers. Like, there's goodness in having more people. And so I always kind of imagine like my ideal scenario is like inviting my friends into my space with Austin and like our families and like more people, the more the merrier. So I don't know. That's sometimes I feel pushed or like obligated to go out with friends constantly, especially single friends who like, you know, they kind of like that more.
Yeah, that's just what they're doing by default.
Right. And like they're trying to go out and meet people that they could potentially be with and stuff like that. So like they're kind of interested in doing different things than I am at this point. So I don't know like what I would want them to know, but that can be kind of a point of tension of like, you want to do different activities almost. So it's about just finding those ones that you guys both like going to get coffee or, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think of like for us at the stage of life we're at with multiple kids at home, it does take a lot more work for us to go out and do stuff. So like we're going on a double date with another couple tonight, which I'm excited for. But that took us between they're a married couple that has several kids as well, and that took us probably like 6 months of trying to find a time that worked for all of us. And we weren't like pushing really hard. It was kind of like, hey, we should do this. Hey, we should do this. You know, for like 3 or 4 months. And it's like, okay, let's put this on the calendar 2 months from now so that we can coordinate childcare and all that stuff. And that's just the reality of having multiple young kids. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. But in the reality of the current world, that's how it functions oftentimes. So if I was going to give any advice or stuff to like single folks or couples who are married, I think for us, it was a harder transition to go from single to married, or it was harder to go from married to adding kids in the mix than it was to go from single to being married, because that's a much bigger impact on how you schedule your life and the things that you can do. So I would say if I was talking to people who are married or who are single, it's probably the one thing I would say is like, if you're friends with me, you're not just friends with me, you're friends with my whole family. It's a package deal. And I think that's biblical. And as a result of that, one of the most loving things I think you can do is say, hey, like, let's go to your house and hang out. Let's have dinner with you. Like, one of the things I love about the church we're a part of is how many of the young singles I see who are like helping parents with their kids or playing with kids, or like we were at our church's home group last night. And there was one young couple that has 2 kids, and I don't think the mom held her baby for like 20 minutes of the hour and a half, 2 hours we were there, because all these other young singles were taking turns taking care of the kids or watching the babies. I think that's a huge thing. So like, if for parents, particularly if you're a single person, if you were friends with someone, they got engaged and married, and now they have kids and you're still single, one of the most loving things you can do for that friend of yours is befriend their kids. Because that means a ton to them. And I think, so that'd be one piece of advice I would give. The other one I would say is like, don't feel bad about like pushing your way in to those relationships. Like if you have a friend who's married with kids and you're like, man, I really want to hang out with them, but they're not initiating anything, and we've maybe talked about doing something they haven't, like, and this, I don't know, this is maybe just how my wife and I operate, but so don't be offended if someone says no, but be like, hey, can I come over to your house for dinner tonight? And join you guys. Oftentimes, I think for a lot of married couples, they'd be like, awesome, yes, please, we want to hang out with you, but it takes us a week to find someone to watch our kids, so we just haven't. Yeah, so those would probably be a couple pieces of advice I would add. There's probably more, but
do you think it would be valuable to like kind of establish that with your friends, like the door's always open, kind of like, is that something you guys have done with your friends?
I mean, we have friends over the years who we've said to that. There's only been 1 or maybe 2 who have actually like took advantage of that, because I think that we kind of live in a culture in the Midwest, especially, where people are kind of like, oh, you just say that, you know. It's like, no, actually, I would really enjoy it if you would, be like, hey, can we come over for dinner in 45 minutes? Be like, sure. We're probably having leftovers, and the house is messy, but that's awesome. And that's me speaking as an extrovert. My wife would probably be like, please give us like 5 hours of notice, and don't be offended if we say no.
Right.
Well, this was amazing. Any final words, Belle?
Put me on the spot. I don't know. This is great. I think these types of conversations need to be had more, because I think people can be misunderstood going through different phases of life, and getting the 3 of us who are all in different phases is really valuable to see different perspectives. So yeah, have conversations with people. That's my final words.
Yeah. I think the final thing I would add to that, similar, would be, don't assume just because you have a friend who's like pulled back time-wise, if they've gotten married or have kids, don't assume that means that they value the relationship any less. It just means that probably at this current season, they got other stuff that's forefront in their mind. And like I was just saying, don't be afraid of pushing your way in. Like, hey, let's get coffee tomorrow morning. I'm going to help. Like, bring your kids. I'll help you watch your kids so we can have a conversation, and you don't have to watch, or whatever the thing is. Like, don't be afraid to push your way in there.
All right. You heard it, friends. We hope that this episode was helpful to you, and we hope that, go first. Just go first, and know that your ultimate friend is Jesus. He's the one that lets you in and never lets you down. So thank you, Belle. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Hey, friend. Thanks for listening. We're all about equipping you to pursue real friendships. You were not created to be alone, because life is just better with real friends. Let's get started.